Darnell Price was 38 years old when he walked into his wife's hospital room with flowers, a get-well card signed by their daughter, and 14 years of a marriage he believed in completely, and heard her tell her best friend that she had already planned how to take everything he had built and leave him with nothing. For 14 years, Darnell had been a devoted husband and custom millwork contractor in Atlanta. The kind of man who showed up on time and finished what he started, and never once in 14 years raised his voice in anger at the woman he married. He had spent 9 of those years growing a one-man shop in his father's old garage into a 12-person operation with a showroom on Peachtree Industrial and contracts that had put custom cabinetry and built-in shelving into some of the finest homes in Buckhead and Alpharetta. He drove a 2016 Ram 1500 with a cracked windshield he kept meaning to replace. He brought his lunch to work in a beat-up cooler his father had given him. Her friends called him Steady Darnell behind his back, meaning quiet, meaning unsurprising, meaning not enough. She had been building a case for months. Her attorney, a woman whose name Darnell would not learn for another 3 weeks, had already reviewed the business valuation their accountant had prepared for refinancing purposes 2 years earlier. The one that had placed Darnell's shop at $1.2 million in assets and growing. The plan, as Darnell heard it from 8 feet outside the hospital room door, was to file as soon as she was discharged, cite irreconcilable differences, and go after half the business as a marital asset before Darnell understood what was happening. What Tasha did not know, what she had never once thought to ask, not in 9 years of watching that business grow from a garage operation into something real, was that Darnell's father had deeded the original property, the tools, and the founding capital of D. Price Millwork to Darnell alone in a legal instrument signed and recorded 14 months before their wedding. She had never asked where the shop started. She had never asked what it was built on. She had stood beside it for 9 years and assumed it was hers to take. She was wrong. And what happened after that would cost her far more than she had planned to take. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The alarm went off at 5:05 a.m. On the Thursday, Tasha went into the hospital, and Darnell Price reached for it from his side of the bed the way he always did, quickly, so it did not wake her. He dressed in the hall with the door pulled mostly shut, canvas work pants, a thermal under his flannel shirt, the steel-toed boots he had owned for 6 years and resold once. He moved through the kitchen in the dark and started the coffee maker and stood at the counter while it ran, looking out the kitchen window at the driveway where the Ram sat under the carport. The Ram had 194,000 miles on it. The cracked windshield had been there since the previous November, when a chunk of asphalt had come off a flatbed on I-285 and he had not swerved fast enough. He kept meaning to get it replaced. He kept finding a reason to spend the money somewhere the business needed it more. That was how Darnell Price had always operated. What the business needed came before what he wanted. What Tasha needed came before what he wanted. What his daughter Camille needed came before everything else. Camille was 9 years old and had her mother's eyes and her grandfather's stubbornness and a laugh that Darnell had described to his father one evening on the back porch in Decatur as the best sound he had ever heard in his life. His father had nodded and said, "That's right. That's how it's supposed to feel." His father had known that kind of certainty because he had felt it himself. For Darnell and for Darnell's mother, and because he was a man who believed that what you felt about the people you loved was the most accurate measure of who you were. Darnell poured his coffee into a travel mug, the one Camille had given him for Father's Day 2 years ago, navy blue with a white D that she had picked out herself, and picked up the beat-up cooler from the counter where he had packed it the night before. Sandwich, apple, 2 cookies Camille had made with Tasha on Sunday. He picked up his keys and his phone and walked out to the Ram. The drive to the shop took 22 minutes at this hour. Peachtree Industrial was quiet before 6. The kind of industrial district quiet that Darnell had always loved, the specific stillness of a place where everything that happens because people build it with their hands. He pulled into the lot behind the showroom, cut the engine, and sat for a moment the way he always did, looking at the building. D. Price Millwork had started in his father's garage in Decatur with a used table saw, a router table, and a 6-foot workbench his father had built himself 30 years earlier. That was how his father had introduced it to him, sitting across the kitchen table when Darnell was 26 and finishing his last year of a construction management program and trying to figure out what came next. His father had spread out 4 documents on the kitchen table: the deed to the garage and the quarter-acre lot it sat on, a savings account statement showing $41,000, a bill of sale for the equipment, and a single-page letter from an attorney naming Darnell Josiah Price as the sole beneficiary and assignee of all of it. He had looked at his father for a long time without speaking. His father had said, "I built something for you to start with. What you build from here is yours." Darnell had looked at the documents. He had looked at his father. He had said, "I won't waste it." He had not. He had spent the first 3 years working 14-hour days alone in the garage, building a reputation out of nothing except the quality of what he made. He had done custom kitchen cabinetry for 2 contractors who had passed his name to 3 more, and those 3 had passed him to 6. And by year 4 he had hired his first employee, a Finnish carpenter named Jerome, who had been with him for 5 years now and ran the shop floor with the quiet authority of a man who took his work personally. By year 6, Darnell had leased the Peachtree Industrial space and moved out of the garage. He had kept the garage property, his father's and now legally his, as a secondary storage site and overflow workspace. By year 9, the showroom was finished. By the time the business was valued at $1.2 million for the refinancing application 2 years earlier. Darnell had built that number out of $41,000 and a used table saw and 12 years of early mornings. He had never announced any of this. He had not worn it. He drove the ROM and brought his lunch and let the work speak for itself, because that was what his father had taught him, and what his father's father had taught his father, and what Darnell intended to teach Camille when she was old enough to understand it. He got out of the truck and went inside. He stood for a moment at the entrance to the showroom, not looking at anything in particular, just standing in the space the way he did every morning, the way his father had stood in the garage in Decatur each morning before starting. A kind of acknowledgement. This is real. This is built. This is yours. Then he went to his desk and started the day. Jerome had the shop floor running by the time Darnell finished his coffee. The sound of the router table came through the workshop wall at half speed first, and then at full. And Darnell stood at his desk in the small office adjacent to the showroom and listened to it the way a conductor listens to an orchestra warming up, recognizing each instrument, tracking each voice, knowing without looking whether everything was right. It was. He opened the project binder for the Callaway job, a full kitchen and butler's pantry in a new build in Alpharetta. Cherry wood panels and dovetail drawer boxes. The kind of work that required precision at every stage and left nowhere to hide a mistake. He went through the cut list for the day, checked the materials inventory against what was staged in the shop, and made 2 notes on the yellow pad he kept at the left side of his desk. At 7:20, his phone rang. He picked it up and looked at the screen. Tasha, he picked up. Morning, Darnell. Her voice was wrong. He was already standing. What happened? I'm at Northside. They brought me in last night. I didn't want to wake you. I had chest pains. They're saying it might be. They're running tests." Her voice steadied. "I'm okay. I need you to come." "I'm coming," he said. He was already reaching for his jacket with his free hand. "Camille? She's at my mother's. She doesn't know yet." "Okay." He set the phone on the desk for 3 seconds and put his head through the shop door. "Jerome, I need to hand you the Callaway binder. Family situation." Jerome looked up from the router table. He did not ask questions. He wiped his hands on his apron and came to the door and took the binder. "Go," he said. Darnell went. He drove to Northside Hospital in 40 minutes through morning traffic, the ROM making the kind of noise at highway speed that had been adding itself to the list of things he was going to deal with when he had a moment. He parked in the visitor garage, bought flowers from the cart near the lobby entrance, yellow tulips, Tasha's favorite since their first Valentine's Day together, and found the cardiac monitoring unit on the 3rd floor. He stood outside the door to her room. Through the small window, he could see her sitting up in the bed, IV in her arm, connected to a monitor that beeped at regular intervals. She was on the phone, and she was talking with a kind of animated ease that told him she was not afraid. She was fine. She was telling the story of her own hospital admission, the way she told every story, with energy, with detail, with herself at the center. He recognized that. He had always loved that about her. He reached for the door handle. He heard her laugh. And then he heard his name. He stopped. His hand was on the handle, and he stopped, because something in the specific register of what came after his name, not warmth, not worry, not the familiar note of a woman talking about her husband with tenderness, stopped him from opening the door. He stood there, and he listened. He stood very still, his hand on the door handle, his weight settled, the yellow tulips in his left hand. The hospital hallway had the specific quality of all hospital hallways: institutional lighting, the antiseptic smell beneath everything, the distant beep of equipment, the purposeful footsteps of nurses moving from room to room. He stood in all of it and listened through the door to his wife's voice. "Girl, I'm fine. They're keeping me for observation." A pause. I know. Listen, I need to tell you something. You need to know what I've been working on." Another pause. Shorter. "No, not yet. Not until I'm out. Denise helped me find the attorney. She's supposed to be the best for this kind of case." Darnell's hand was still on the door handle. "Here's the thing. Darnell thinks that shop is just a business. He doesn't know what I know." Her voice dropped a register, not to a whisper, but to the focused, confidential tone of someone sharing a strategy. The accountant put it at $1.2 million 2 years ago. "My attorney says if we file before he suspects anything, we can go after half as a marital asset. Half, Keisha, that's $600,000. And he will not see it coming. You know how he is." Steady, Darnell. He will not see it coming. A beat. He heard her laugh again, brief and sharp. "I've been planning this for 8 months. I'm telling you because I need you to be ready to be my witness if it comes to that. He's always at that shop. He's never home. That's the case. Irreconcilable differences plus abandonment. Keisha, this man has not once in the last year asked me what I need. This is what I need." He did not open the door. He did not move for a long time. The monitor beeped on the other side of the door at regular intervals, steady and exact. The hallway was quiet, except for the distant sound of a cart being wheeled somewhere down the wing and the low murmur of a conversation at the nurse's station 40 feet away. His hands were at his sides. They were not shaking. He noticed that with the same detached precision with which he noticed everything structural, the quality of his own stillness, the way the hallway light fell on the linoleum at a slight angle, the sounds of the cardiac unit doing its work around him. He thought about the yellow tulips. He looked at them. He held them and looked at them and thought about the first Valentine's Day, the small apartment they had shared in East Point when he was still building the business out of the garage, and money was close enough to feel it in every decision. He had not been able to afford much. He had bought yellow tulips because she had mentioned once, casually, at a grocery store, that they were her favorite. He had remembered. He had always remembered things like that. He stood in the hallway for 4 full minutes. Then, he walked back to the elevator and pressed the button and rode it down to the lobby and walked through the automatic doors to the visitor parking garage. He sat in the ROM for 26 minutes. He did not call Gerald. He did not call his father, who had been gone for 3 years. He did not call anyone. He sat in the parking garage with the yellow tulips on the passenger seat, and he thought about load-bearing things, about what held and what failed and the difference between the two, and how long it takes a failure that started quietly to show itself all the way. He thought about 8 months. He thought about the founding documents his father had spread on the kitchen table when Darnell was 26 years old. He thought about the attorney who had prepared them, a man named Elwood Gaines in Decatur, who had been his father's attorney for 30 years, and who was, as far as Darnell knew, still practicing. He picked up his phone and called Jerome. "How are we on the Callaway cut list?" Jerome said they were on schedule. "Good," Darnell said. "I'm going to be out the rest of the day. Call me if the cherry veneer from Sutton's comes in." He backed out of the parking space. He did not go back upstairs. He drove to Decatur. He drove fast, and then he drove the speed limit, and then he drove fast again, and then he pulled over on a side street 2 miles from Northside, and sat in the Ram with the engine running, and looked at the cracked windshield. 8 months. He thought about the 8 months. He went back through them the way he went through a cut list, item by item, checking each one against what he remembered, the charity dinner in January that she had attended without him, and come home from distant in a way he had attributed to tiredness. The gym bag she had started carrying everywhere in February, the same month she had mentioned, casually, that she thought they should update their wills. The evening in March when he had come home from a late installation to find her on the phone in the bedroom, with the door nearly closed. And she had come out when she heard him and been immediately normal in a way that had registered somewhere below his conscious attention and stayed there. He had noticed all of it. He had not done anything about it because none of it, taken individually, constituted a load path. Now he had the load path. Now he could see where the weight was going and where it had been going for 8 months, while he drove the ROM and brought his lunch and marked his cut lists and went to Camille's school events and paid the joint account on time every month. He thought about Steady Darnell. He thought about what people saw when they looked at him and what they thought that meant. He thought about all the people in his life who had confused his stillness for inactivity, his patience for passivity, his quietness for the absence of something. He had been building for 9 years. He had turned $41,000 and a used table saw into a $1, 2 million operation, one careful cut at a time, and the people around him had looked at the ROM and the beat-up cooler and the cracked windshield and decided he was not going anywhere. He was about to demonstrate the precise flaw in that assessment. He merged back onto the road and drove to Decatur. Elwood Gaines operated out of a 2-story brick building on a side street 3 blocks from the old Decatur Square, the same building he had been in for 31 years, with the same frosted glass on the front door and the same wooden bench in the waiting room that Darnell remembered sitting on as a boy when his father brought him along on errands. The receptionist. A woman named Mrs. Tillman, who had been there nearly as long as the bench, looked up when Darnell came through the door and recognized him immediately. "Darnell Price," she said. "Lord, you look just like your father." "People say that," Darnell said. "He would be proud of you." "I hope so," Darnell said. "Is Mr. Gaines available?" Elwood Gaines was 71 years old, with white hair close cropped to his head, and a suit that said he had been wearing suits for 50 years and had no intention of stopping. He had a handshake that communicated exactly the right things, warm enough to mean it, firm enough to mean the rest. He gestured to the chair across from his desk and sat down and looked at Darnell the way men of his particular experience looked at people who came through the door with something they were carrying. "Tell me," Elwood said. Darnell told him. All of it. The hospital. The hallway. What he had heard through the door. 8 months. The attorney named Denise had found the plan to file before Darnell suspected anything. Half the business. $600,000. Elwood listened without interrupting. He had a legal pad in front of him, and he wrote on it in a slow, deliberate hand during the parts that required noting. When Darnell finished, Elwood set his pen down. "Your father came to me in 2009, he said. "He told me he was going to give you the garage, the tools, and the seed money, and he wanted it done properly so that it was yours without question." "I know," Darnell said. "The instrument we prepared was a gift deed. Not a loan, not a transfer with conditions, a clean gift deed, recorded with Fulton County in February of 2010. Your wedding was in April of 2011. The deed predates the marriage by 14 months. "I know," Darnell said again. "Which means the founding assets of D. Price Millwork are separate property under Georgia law. They were yours before the marriage. They transferred to the business entity you subsequently created, and the business has never been commingled with marital assets in a way that would change that characterization." He paused. "Has it?" Darnell thought carefully. "No, the shop accounts are separate. Tasha has her own accounts. We have a joint household account that I fund from my salary draw. The business accounts have never been touched by the joint account or by her." Elwood nodded slowly. "Then her attorney is going to hit a wall," he said. "They've been looking at a business valuation done for refinancing purposes. They've been assuming the business is a marital asset. When they discover the deed, and they will discover it in discovery, or I will make certain they discover it, the case they've been building for 8 months collapses." "What do I need to do?" Darnell asked. "First, you do nothing to indicate that you know. Go back to your regular life. Let her file if she's going to file. The moment she files, you call me." He leaned forward slightly. "Second, I want to review all of your business documentation. Founding records, the deed, business entity formation documents, all of it. I want to know the case inside and out before I make a single move." "I have it," Darnell said. "All of it. My father kept copies of everything, and so do I." Elwood looked at him for a moment. "Your father was a careful man. He taught me to be." "I know," Elwood said. "That's why I'm not worried." He stood and extended his hand. Darnell stood and shook it. "Go home," Elwood said. "Go see your daughter. Let this proceed at the pace she's set. Her timeline, her assumptions, her strategy, all of it works in your favor." Darnell picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He paused at the door. "Mr. Gaines," he said. "Yes, she was planning this for 8 months. She was in the hospital with a cardiac event, and what she was talking about on the phone was how to file before I noticed." Elwood Gaines looked at him steadily over the desk. "I know," he said. "That tells you what you need to know about the marriage. The legal matter is the simpler problem. Darnell nodded once. He went back to the ROM and drove home. He picked up Camille from her grandmother's house that evening. His mother-in-law, a woman named Gloria, who had always been kind to Darnell in the uncomplicated way of someone who genuinely liked him, met him at the door with an expression that communicated both concern about her daughter and uncertainty about the full picture. She had been told only that Tasha was at the hospital for observation and was expected home within a day or two. Darnell confirmed this, thanked her, and did not say anything else, because there was nothing else to say yet that would be useful. Camille came through the door behind her grandmother with her backpack and a drawing she had made on a piece of Gloria's printer paper. A figure in a hospital bed, presumably her mother, with what appeared to be a large rainbow overhead. She held it up. "It's for Mama," she said, "so she feels better." "She's going to love it," Darnell said. He meant it. He took her home and made dinner, pasta with a tomato sauce from the jar that Camille considered acceptable, and sat with her at the kitchen table while she ate, and told him about a disagreement with her best friend at school and the book she was reading, and a question she had about why the sky was blue on some days and white on others. He answered the last question as fully as he could, which was more fully than most adults could have managed, because Darnell Price had always been curious about how things worked and had passed that curiosity to his daughter without quite trying to. He washed the dishes after dinner. He helped Camille with her homework. He read half of her book to her at bedtime in the bad character voices she always requested, and when she fell asleep, he sat for a moment in the chair beside her bed in the dark and listened to her breathe and thought about what it meant to build something that lasted. Then he went downstairs and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen and wrote. From memory, every piece of founding documentation he knew existed. The deed, the date, the filing record, the business formation papers, the separate account records, and the same organized list he would have made for a complex millwork project. Clear, sequential, complete, he put the cap back on the pen. He looked at the list. His father had given him more than a garage and a table saw. He had given him a foundation so clean and so clear that no one could take what stood on top of it, not even someone who had been standing beside it for 9 years and had never once looked at what it was built on. He folded the list in half and put it in the front pocket of his flannel shirt. He went to bed. Tasha came home from the hospital on Saturday afternoon. The cardiac event had been significant enough to keep her for 2 days, but not. The attending physician told Darnell when he called Friday morning to ask. As her husband, he had the right to ask. Structurally serious. Stress-induced arrhythmia. Rest was prescribed. Follow-up was required. She would need to take it easy for the next several weeks. Darnell was at the house when the car service brought her home. He had cleaned the house, done the laundry, stocked the refrigerator with the things she liked. Camille was beside herself with the specific agitated relief of a 9-year-old whose mother has been absent for 2 days and is now back. She presented the rainbow drawing immediately, with the seriousness of a formal gift. Tasha held the drawing and looked at it, and looked at Camille, and her face did the thing that faces do when love arrives without warning and finds them unprepared. "This is beautiful, baby," she said. "I'm going to put this up where I can see it every day." She looked at Darnell over Camille's head. He looked back at her. His face was still. "Thank you for taking care of everything," she said. "Of course," Darnell said. He meant it. He had taken care of everything, and he intended to keep doing so. And he also intended to protect what he had built with exactly the patience and precision his father had taught him. These two things were not in conflict. They were simply the full picture of who he was. He gave her space that weekend. He brought her tea and her medication and asked once each day how she was feeling, and asked nothing else. On Sunday evening, she sat on the couch with Camille, watching something on television, and Darnell sat at the kitchen table with the Callaway binder open and caught up on the work he had missed. He did not let her see that anything had changed. He was very good at stillness. He had always been. Tasha filed for divorce 11 days after she came home from the hospital. The filing arrived at the house on a Friday morning, delivered by a process server who rang the doorbell at 8:15 a.m. When Darnell had already been at the shop for an hour and 40 minutes, he got the call from Tasha, her voice careful and controlled, reading from a script she had prepared at 8:30. "I need to tell you something," she said. "You're going to get served today." "I see," Darnell said. "I filed for divorce. I should have talked to you first. I know that." He said nothing. "Darnell, I heard you," he said. "I'm sorry. I think we've known for a long time that this wasn't working. I think you know that too. I'll call you tonight," he said. He hung up. He called Elwood Gaines at 8:32 a.m. Elwood said, "Good. Now we move." In the 3 weeks between the filing and Elwood's response, Tasha moved through her plan with the confidence of someone who believes they have already won. She told her mother. She told 2 more friends beyond Keisha. She posted, subtly enough to be deniable, a quote on her social media about new beginnings and the courage it takes to choose yourself. She wore new clothes, not extravagant, but new, the kind of small upgrade that communicates a change in self-conception. She rescheduled a follow-up cardiology appointment twice, and when Darnell asked if she needed him to take her, she said no. She had it, her tone carrying the specific warmth of someone who is being careful to behave normally while the plan proceeds. Darnell observed all of this and said nothing. He made dinner 3 nights that week. He helped Camille with her Georgia Ecosystems project. He drove to the shop in the morning and drove home in the evening and brought his lunch in the beat-up cooler and did not change a single visible thing about how he moved through his days. He was very good at that. At the shop, Jerome had noticed something was wrong and had the discipline not to ask about it directly. Instead, he did what good shop foremen do. He ran the floor tighter than usual, made sure nothing needed Darnell's attention, that Jerome could handle himself, and on the Thursday of the 2nd week, left a container of his wife's banana pudding in the break room refrigerator with a note that said, "Figured you might want some." Darnell ate all of it standing at the counter between 2 customer calls. He had told no one at the shop what was happening. He would not until there was something concrete to tell. The response Elwood filed 3 weeks later was 42 pages, and the first exhibit attached to it was a certified copy of the gift deed recorded with Fulton County on February 17, 2010, 14 months and 22 days before the wedding. The deed described in specific legal language the transfer of the Decatur garage property, the tools and equipment therein, and $41,000 in a designated savings account from Bernard Josiah Price to his son Darnell Josiah Price as a gift, unconditional, with no expectation of repayment or return. The second exhibit was the business formation document for D. Price Millwork, LLC, filed with the Georgia Secretary of State 8 months later, identifying Darnell Josiah Price as sole member and founder, with the gift deed assets listed as founding capital. The third exhibit was a 12-year accounting summary prepared by Darnell's business accountant, showing the complete and unbroken separation between the business's operating accounts and any marital or joint accounts. Elwood told Darnell the morning the response was filed, "Her attorney is going to request an urgent conference within a week." It took 4 days. Keisha, Darnell learned through Elwood, who received the name from opposing counsel's office, had already been retained as a character witness. That retention had just become significantly less useful. The case Tasha's attorney had been building for 8 months had been built on a foundation that did not exist. The business was not a marital asset. It had never been a marital asset. It was Darnell's, entirely and unambiguously, the same way his father's workbench in the Decatur garage had been his father's, built with his own hands, on a foundation laid before any of this had happened. The irony that Darnell noted privately, without saying anything to anyone, was that the Callaway job, the Cherrywood kitchen and butler's pantry in Alpharetta, that Jerome had held together during the days Darnell was in Decatur and in conference rooms and on phone calls with Elwood, was for a family that Tasha had met twice at neighborhood events and described, both times, as people she would like to know better. She had once mentioned, on the drive home from one such event, that the Callaways had a beautiful house and wondered what the kitchen must look like. It looked like D. Price millwork. It looked like 12 cherry wood cabinet doors with hand-cut dovetail drawer boxes. 4 weeks of Darnell's team's best work, installed that April to the kind of client response that gets turned into a referral immediately. It looked like what the shop had always looked like when it was doing its work at its best. Precise, durable, and exactly what it promised to be. Tasha had never set foot in the showroom. She had driven past it 100 times. She had attended the open house in year 6 when Darnell moved from the garage to Peachtree Industrial, stood in the space for 40 minutes with a glass of wine and said it was nice, and had not come back in 3 years. She had never asked what a dovetail joint was. She had never asked why the cherry wood cost more than maple. She had never asked why certain clients drove 2 hours to order from a shop in Marietta instead of working with someone local. She had never asked. So, he had never explained. It was not a secret. It was simply a life she had chosen to stand beside without looking at directly. Elwood reported the urgent conference call to Darnell the following evening. Her attorney, Simmons, asked if there was any possibility the deed was a post-marital instrument structured to appear premarital. He said it without inflection. I told her the deed was recorded with Fulton County 14 months before the wedding and invited her to pull the county record herself. What did she say? She said she would need to advise her client. A pause. Darnell. You should know what Simmons told me her client said when Simmons called to explain the situation. Tell me. Her client said, he never told me his father gave him the shop. Darnell was quiet. No, he said. I didn't. He had not told her because she had never asked. In 9 years of marriage and 9 years of watching D. Price millwork grow from a garage operation into a showroom on Peachtree Industrial, Tasha had never once asked, where did this start? What did your father give you? What is this built on? She had seen the shop and the showroom and the ROM he drove to get there, and had assembled her own picture of what existed, and the picture had not included a recorded gift deed in Fulton County from February 2010. She had never asked. So he had never told her. It had not been a secret. It had simply been a fact that lived in the documentation and in his memory and in the front pocket of his flannel shirt on a folded yellow legal pad page, waiting for whoever needed to know it. She had no idea, Darnell said. No, Elwood agreed. Not a clue. The settlement conference was held on a Wednesday morning in a conference room in Midtown Atlanta, on the 14th floor of a glass office building, with a view of the skyline that Darnell looked at for a long moment before sitting down. He had worked on buildings in that skyline. He had built cabinets and shelving and custom millwork that was inside several of those buildings right now, hidden in kitchens and libraries and butlers' pantries, doing its job without announcement. Tasha arrived with Simmons, a composed woman in a gray suit who had the professional manner of someone who understood she was going to lose this argument and had decided to manage the loss with dignity. Tasha sat across from Darnell at the conference table in a green blazer he had not seen before. She looked tired. The arrhythmia medication made her face slightly puffy at the edges. She did not look at him directly at first. Elwood opened with the deed. He walked through the timeline in the same order he had presented it to Darnell in his office: the founding date, the recording date, the marriage date. The 14-month gap that was not a gap but a plain legal fact. He set certified copies of every document on the table. He was methodical and unhurried, and the conference room was very quiet. Simmons made 2 arguments. Elwood addressed both. The first was that Darnell's sweat equity during the marriage, his labor within the marriage years, applied to a premarital asset, constituted a marital contribution to the business's growth. Elwood acknowledged this was a recognized legal theory, and then explained, with documentation, that Georgia courts applied a specific methodology for calculating such contributions, and that the resulting calculation would yield a figure dramatically lower than the $600,000 Tasha had hoped for. He had a forensic accountant's report in Exhibit G. The second argument was that Darnell's salary draw from the business during the marriage had been used to fund marital expenses, blurring the line between business and marital assets. Elwood had 12 years of bank records demonstrating a clean, consistent separation between business accounts and the joint household account. The salary draw was a payment for services, not a commingling of assets. Simmons asked for a recess. Darnell refilled his water glass. Elwood organized papers. The Skyline sat in the window. "She's going to accept a number," Elwood said quietly. "Not 600,000. Significantly less." "I know," Darnell said. "Are you prepared?" "I've been prepared since February of 2010, Darnell said. "I just didn't know it yet." They came back. Simmons, with the controlled neutrality of a professional doing difficult work, said her client was prepared to accept a structured settlement on the basis of Darnell's marital sweat equity contribution, as calculated by Elwood's forensic accountant, and would withdraw the claim against the founding business assets. The forensic accountant's number was $87,000. Payable over 4 years. Tasha looked at Darnell for the first time since sitting down. He looked back. He held it for 2 seconds. He said, "Your father never asked what mine gave me. That was the whole mistake." He said it quietly, without heat, the way he said everything. Then he straightened in his chair and told Elwood he was ready to sign the settlement terms. He did not watch her face. He did not need to. The aftermath came down in specifics, the way all real things come down. Tasha moved into an apartment in Smyrna in March, a 2-bedroom, which she chose because of Camille's custody arrangement, which gave Darnell primary custody 4 nights a week. The apartment was nice, in a complex with a pool and a fitness center. She posted photographs of the space on social media with the caption, "New Chapter." Keisha commented a string of fire emojis. Darnell did not follow either account and learned this from his sister, who monitored these things with the focused interest of a person who had opinions about what had happened and a limited outlet for expressing them. The attorney she had retained for 8 months had billed $34,000 by the time the case settled. The settlement itself required no payment from Tasha, but awarded her $87,000 from Darnell over 4 years, a number that bore no resemblance to the $600,000 she had been planning on. Her accountant had told her, based on the refinancing valuation, that she was entitled to half. Her attorney had told her the case was strong. What neither of them had told her was that a case is only as strong as its foundation, and hers had no foundation at all. Keisha, as it emerged over the subsequent months, had been Tasha's confidante in the planning for all 8 months. She had introduced Tasha to the attorney. She had told Tasha that Darnell would never fight it, that he was too steady, too quiet, that he would sign whatever was put in front of him, because that was who he was. She had been wrong about all of it, in the way that people who mistake quietness for passivity are always wrong when the quiet man finally moves. D. Price Millwork finished the Callaway kitchen in April, 3 weeks after the settlement. Jerome called Darnell to the shop floor when the final installation was complete, and they stood together in the workshop and looked at the finished cabinet assembly staged against the wall. Cherry wood panels and dovetailed drawer boxes, each joint cut to tolerance, each finish line clean. Jerome ran a hand along one of the panels. "That's right," Jerome said. "That's right," Darnell agreed. The Callaway client called the following week to say his wife had cried when she saw the kitchen. He said it the way clients say it when they mean it, not as a compliment exactly, but as testimony. Darnell thanked him and wrote the invoice and filed the job card in the completed project binder that lived on the shelf behind his desk, beside 11 other completed project binders going back 9 years. He had started the 12th. He expanded the shop that summer. Jerome had been telling him for 2 years that they needed a second CNC router. The work had outgrown the single machine they were running, and the wait times on complex carved panel work were pushing project timelines further than Darnell was comfortable with. He had always agreed and always found a reason to wait. In June, 3 months after the settlement, he stopped waiting. He put a deposit on a machine from a dealer in Norcross and had it installed and operational by the first week of July. Jerome had stood in front of the new machine for a full minute without saying anything. "That's what I'm talking about," he said finally. Darnell had already moved on to the next item on his list. He had refinanced the Peachtree Industrial Space in August, on terms that reflected 12 years of clean business history and a credit profile that made the bank officer ask, with genuine curiosity, whether Darnell had ever considered taking on an equity partner. Darnell had said no, politely, and signed the refinancing documents, which reflected a current business valuation that the forensic accountant had placed, conservatively, at $1.7 million. The $600,000 Tasha had planned to take had become $850,000 he had instead. He thought about that sometimes. Not with satisfaction exactly. Satisfaction implied that the point had been to win something, and the point had never been to win something. The point had been to protect what his father had given him, what 12 years of early mornings and careful cuts and marked-up cut lists had turned into. The point had been to still be standing. He was standing. He had started the 12th project binder. He learned later, from Elwood, who had heard it from Simmons in the professional exchange that closes settled cases, that Tasha had asked, after the conference room was empty, why Darnell had never told her about the deed. Elwood had relayed the question to Darnell at their final billing meeting. In the same measured way he said everything, with the last invoice in a folder between them on the old desk in the Decatur brick building. "What did Simmons say?" Darnell asked. "She told me that her client said, 'I was with him for 14 years. He never once mentioned his father gave him that property.'" Darnell was quiet for a moment. "She never asked," he said. "No, she knew the shop. She saw it every day for 9 years. She never once asked where it started or what it was built on." "People see the surface," Elwood said. "The ones who never build anything themselves only know to look at the surface." Darnell picked up the final invoice, looked at it, and set it back down. He thought about his father spreading 4 documents on the kitchen table in Decatur when Darnell was 26 years old and the future was a road that had not yet been built. He thought about the way his father had said, "I built something for you to start with. What you build from here is yours. He thought about the deed. Recorded February 17th, 2010. 14 months before the wedding. Sitting in the Fulton County records the entire time. Quiet and patient and complete, carrying its weight without announcing it, waiting for whoever needed to find it. My father was a careful man, Darnell said. He was, Elwood agreed. And he made you one. Darnell wrote the check for the invoice. He shook Elwood's hand. He thanked Mrs. Tillman on the way out, who told him to come back whenever he needed, and that she hoped things were going to be all right. They are, he said. They're already all right. He walked out to the Ram. He sat in the driver's seat for a moment, with the door open, and the June heat coming off the pavement, and the old neighborhood quiet around him. The Decatur neighborhood where his father had lived and where the brick buildings stood and where, 3 blocks over, the garage still existed. The original quarter-acre lot his father had given him, currently used for storage and overflow work. He thought about Camille. He was picking her up at 4. She had a school project about Georgia ecosystems that she needed help researching, and had specifically requested that her father help her because, she had explained with great seriousness, he was better at research than Mama. He smiled at that. He pulled the door shut and started the ROM and backed out of the parking space. The cracked windshield was still there. He had been meaning to get it fixed. He had put the money toward a new drum sander for the shop last month, and before that toward Camille's fall extracurriculars, and before that toward the Callaway materials order that had come in larger than expected. He would get to the windshield when he got to it. He merged onto the road heading north, back toward the shop, back toward the work, back toward the life he had built correctly from a foundation his father laid, and a patience that had been in his family for generations, and that no picture, no plan, and no 8 months of hallway scheming had ever once come close to touching. The ROM made its usual highway noise. The sun was high, and the city was loud, and Darnell Price drove through it with both hands on the wheel and his eyes on what was in front of him. He did not look back. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.